Finally, it is time for a black bear hotspot guide, and this one was tough. In communicating with others who have been grinding black bear, one thing I've become somewhat certain of is that there is major variance between individual maps. Generally, it seems most maps have bears in the same general areas, but the way those bears are distributed, and especially the areas that spawn males, seem to be massively different. Because of that, I've decided to not look at trends across several maps like usual, but instead to specifically look at my map, but include every lake that spawns black bears, even if on my map that lake is female only, and there are a lot of those. We'll talk later in this video about some techniques or strategies for grinding, but my reasoning for this is to map out what I believe to be every location you should at least consider checking on occasion to see if you've had any respawns in those spots. So with all that out of the way, let's check out the map. As you can see, there are a lot of red lakes. As I've continued to check those lakes, I see nothing but female bears there, 780 kills in. That doesn't mean I didn't have males there at one time, but as it stands, this is my experience. Again, everyone's map is different. The best advice I can give is to check out each lake and see what your map looks like, and again, there will be more that goes into the process in the strategy portion of the video later. Next, you'll also notice a lot of yellow lakes. These lakes are reasonably consistent, and I can pretty much expect 1 to 3 males here every run, with some exceptions in both directions. If there are 0, I move on and worry about it next run. If there are 4 or more, I try to find a way to not delete the zones with hunting pressure. Finally, you'll see the record lowest amount of green lakes for any hotspot guide I've ever done. 2. These 2 lakes are the ones that produce the majority of my bears per run. We'll quickly look at the small lake in southern Bear Wallow Basin first. This lake generally produces anywhere from 3 to 6 males and was the location of my second rare and first cinnamon of the grind. Not only does it provide its own hunting pressure solution in the hunting tower, but it also tends to be fairly easy to shoot bears as they flee, as they don't normally run up the hill, they'll kind of go off either direction of the side of the lake. Now, onto the best lake. Everybody knows this lake, and I probably don't even need to go over it. However, it is the absolute best lake for black bears. The amount of males that tend to spawn here is absurd. Consistently double digits, and very often with some sizable bears among them. Now, I highly recommend a tripod to deal with the hunting pressure, and generally a second weapon as well. Much like at Bear Wallow Basin, the bears are often in sight long after the first shot, leaving plenty of opportunity for follow-ups, and for hunting pressure to quickly get out of hand if you don't have something to help curb that. As we transition to some tips and pointers for the grind itself, I want to point out that, on average, I can get 30 to 35 male bears per hour between all the lakes I marked. These 2 areas, and particularly the latter, are responsible for just about half of those on each run. So then, let's talk about some strategy. First of all, black bear have 2 drink times, one around midday and one in the evening from 1500 to 2000 hours. For our purposes, we'll be focusing on the later zone, as it lasts for more than a real-life hour compared to the 15-minute real-time midday drink zones. Black bear are a bit different in that they seem to reach their zones very late in some cases. I've talked about this before, but my approach is generally to start at about 1600, check a few lakes, jump to the Mule Deer Outpost Lake, take any bears I can from there, and then continue on through any lake I haven't yet hunted. Once I've completed that, I start to double back. I leave the best areas for just before 1900, as I want to be able to see well to get the shots required off, but consistently, for hundreds of kills now, I find that hunting the same lakes a second time on the same run produces more bear encounters. At lakes that only produce a total of 3 bears or less, this really doesn't matter. In theory, you could just wait until later. Generally, I find 1730 or later has most bears in place. I could just go to those lakes at that time and probably save myself a trip. However, lakes such as the Bear Wallow Basin Lake, the one in the southwest at the Mule Deer Outpost, and even some others, produce too many bears to reasonably shoot before they all flee. By taking a few of those bears out earlier on, it's taking some of the pressure off my own shoulders at that later time, as some of the bears have already been shot. Now, that doesn't mean I don't still have some escape. but generally I find that very few end up getting away with this approach. Now, part of it is personal preference. I think probably it could be faster overall to start at 1700, hit every lake just once, again saving the lakes with better spawns for later to ensure all bears can be there, but for me, that gets too repetitive. Grade 1 grinding is already naturally repetition based, and for me, starting earlier and not having that almost non-stop time reset back to the beginning is just more enjoyable. If you can deal with that monotony, I wouldn't be surprised if that is technically a better method. As always, there are plenty of ways to grind, and I don't think any are necessarily right or wrong, so I wanted to explain my personal approach as well as what I believe to be a potential flaw in it. Something else to consider in this grind is tent placement. You'll notice at several lakes I have tents on opposite sides. In order to maximize efficiency, I've removed tents from lakes that stop producing males and added second ones to lakes that take a lot of time to run around and claim bears. My approach of hitting every lake twice can sometimes cut it close if I have to track a bear or two farther than usual after a poor hit. These tents can gain me back those extra minutes I may need to get to every location before the drink time ends. Lastly, I want to emphasize adaptation on your grind. I find that very often in stream chats, comments, and around the community, statements like, "my male stopped spawning, so I quit the grind," are way too frequent. My personal opinion through thousands of hours is that respawns are not always in the same location as the shot, meaning that just because I shot 3 bears at an individual lake on one run, there may not be 3 bears next time. And even if there are, those bears are not necessarily the direct respawns of the 3 I shot at that lake. They could have come from just about anywhere. Now remember, this is all conjecture and guesswork based on experience, but the point remains, be willing to check other spots. If a good lake stops producing, that doesn't mean they've disappeared. In all likelihood, the respawns are just at different lakes. Case in point, the Sun Sisters Lake. You may have noticed I have that one marked. Though I never go there, I haven't been there on stream or in a single video, and I've never shot a bear there since beginning this grind. And as far as I could tell at the very beginning, I had no bears there at all. I checked the spot, I checked literally every body of water at black bear drink time and saw no bears. Now when I check that spot, I have several. Things move around during the course of these grinds very commonly, and I cannot possibly stress enough that you have to be willing to sometimes take an hour or several hours and figure it out. Go to every lake again if you have to. Go even after bear drink times and check tracks, take a 4-wheeler around the lakes, do whatever you gotta do, look for those zones, and if that's what it takes, sometimes that's what you gotta do. I think what gets lost in these videos and even live streams is that what you might call the boring stuff that gets cuts from finished videos or gets done off stream, as it's really not the most fun to watch content. Some people will get lucky and get a great one without the need to do any of that, and there's nothing wrong with that. However, that just can't be true for everyone, otherwise they wouldn't really be rare or difficult. If things start to seem different, it's worth spending a little time to see if they've moved and changing up your approach to adapt to that. I understand it all sounds pretty difficult and technical when it's all laid out like there's a bunch of information in like 10 minutes, but it really isn't. When it comes down to it, it's a matter of finding the bears, shooting the males, rinse and repeat, and most importantly, being willing to move your setup if and when it becomes necessary. On that note, that is the end of this black bear guide. If you have any questions, feel free to leave them in the comments below. I'll do my best to answer as many of those as possible. As always, thank you guys for watching, best of luck on your black bear grind, and I'll see you next time.